In a noisy world, we pause and hear a wiser path is becoming clear. Peaceful voices.
Welcome, my friends. Thank you for joining us. Today we have a visit from a wonderful author and activist, a trainer, a change maker, a hope bringer. This is Rivera Sun, who you all may know from all of her work all over the internet, bringing change in the spaces that require it. She is a trainer in nonviolent solutions. She is a campaign leader for groups like the Pace Bene wonderful organization, the Campaign for Solutions, gosh, there's so many, an author of award-winning books. And I'm just so grateful to be joined by Rivera Sun. Rivera, thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, thank you, John. It's really lovely to be here and to be having a second great conversation with you. I know that these discussions you have always go broad and deep at the same time, which is a delight.
Thank you. And gosh, just as I did before, the way I like to begin the conversations is always on a hopeful note that, within Chinese medicine, if we're giving a treatment, it's very important, for instance, if I have an obstructed shoulder, or, a tight muscle up here, if I try to release that muscle, I have to shape myself so that I have a place for that tension to release through to. If everything is blocked here and I just push into the muscle, all that happens is more obstruction. And so part of the healing process in any Taoist context is creating a pathway through first, so that when we release the obstruction, we release that pent-up energy, it has a place to go. And I'm wondering about the directions, the throughway that you've been dreaming about, so that when all of this pent-up emotion that we're experiencing these days in turbulent times, which direction are you hoping that all of that extra energy can go?
Yeah, in these turbulent, chaotic times that we're living through, a lot of pre-existing conditions are coming to a crisis point, to a boiling point. And while there's very particular kinds of change that we all, not all, but many of us are hoping to see at, say, the federal level and among politicians. On a deeper level, a lot of the changes that we've needed for a lot longer than this moment. And some of the things that we're being invited into are things that we already know we want to be doing in our hearts. Things like supporting local businesses and local food, creating in-person analog social networks that are robust and vital, doing the care work in our communities and not just outsourcing that to increasingly unaffordable systems. So when I think of that outlet from the pent-up shoulder of our political crisis, part of the pathway that some of that goes is by us working together. It's not just individual choices, but working together to join with the systems and structures that provide ethical alternatives, many of which are pre-existing. They already are in our communities, and they need more volunteers, more participants, more people to join the co-op, more people to enliven the system. And so it's a great opportunity to think about how we redirect that.
Yeah, that's so true. That there's already plenty of open pathways. Oftentimes we're just ignorant of them, or our attention's been directed elsewhere, and we didn't know that the whole time behind our back somebody was creating something wonderful that we can allow our energy to go into.
Or, the cost benefit that we're doing in the back of our heads between time and money and effort. It's shifting these days, right? And many people are feeling that shift, often around the affordability crisis. Things like, we're doing a home improvement project because our washer machine broke. Do we just run down to the hardware store and buy that little specialized tool? Or do we take an extra 5 minutes to find the tool co-op in our neighborhood and go borrow the tool, or to ask on our, parents chat group for our kids at school, who has a quarter-inch spanner or whatever? Um, so, thinking outside of the convenience of the capitalist system or the the ways that we've been trained to think as consumers about all of our problems to these systems that could really benefit from our participation in it and vice versa.
Yes.
That gives me a lot of hope. It's like an enduring, grounding hope. It's there for us to explore and experiment with. And we just have more and more reasons to get out of the habitual patterns that our culture trains us in and find these alternatives
Mhm.
or build them. Some of them need to be built locally.
Yeah, and it's always exciting to recognize that these solutions have been around for a lot longer often than the current distractions that we're having, the more modern, solutions that sometimes lead into dead ends or create more problems than they're solving. But do you have a favorite three that you could list so that people could look into if they're just hearing this and they're saying, "Oh yeah, maybe I can reach out to our local tool co-op," and they hadn't realized that such a thing was even possible. Do you have some other
Yeah,
favorites?
I am a huge fan of tool co-ops, both formal and informal. So sometimes the informal ones look a little bit like that retired neighbor who has an amazing tool set in his
Mhm.
garage and doesn't mind loaning it to you as long as you bring it back working, right? That's an informal network. And letting your buddy at the gym know that that's in the network. That's a little bit of how we engage a little bit deeper with those. The formal systems look like community groups who actually make literal libraries where you have a membership, you check things in, you check things out, and they can have everything from blenders and juicers to mini skill saws that people can borrow.
Mhm.
And so that's one that I love. I also am a big fan of food sharing. So whether that takes the form of a little free pantry or a little free fridge or supporting your local food bank or growing if you are someone who has a little land resource, growing an extra row with the intention to give it away.
Yes.
Um, I just think that's a beautiful part of being human, and it's an important thing to celebrate even one form of abundance in a time when people are really feeling scarcity because of the economy.
Mhm.
And then the third thing I would mention, and this connects a little bit to the theme that brought us together today of self-care, is to find a way to have meaningful social connections. And this is surprising for some people because we feel like our lives are full and busy enough already. But what's taking up a fair amount of people's times is digital technology and always being online, scanning those headlines, being stuck on social media. It's very different than being part of a monthly book club, for example, through the library, or being part of a women's circle that gathers monthly, or a dad's hiking group where you go for a little hike and you swap parenting tips, right? These are so important to human beings that increasingly throughout Europe, doctors are prescribing, like writing prescriptions for walking therapy, culture vitamins. So you get together with a group of people and you go to an art museum or you go to a music concert, because they understand that we are fundamentally social animals, and we need a little bit of social structure these days to help us get out of our little bubbles and get into that connection with other folks.
Mm.
So yeah, I think that's the third one is to take a little time to make sure you have a positive social interaction. And in the kind of framework of our current crisis, I think what that also helps to counteract is the view of humanity that we absorb just from reading headlines, which is always dire, always bleak, and pretty much always negative.
Yes.
It's not that the headlines are untrue necessarily. It's that there's a lot more to the human story and human existence and human experience than that. And if we want to sustain ourselves through this time of great crisis and great change, we need to stay anchored to our active, lived memory and remembering of what is so beautiful about being human, because there is so much of that. Because that's what we want to affirm. That's the world we want to build, expand, make easier to see flourish. So yeah, staying connected to it.
I love that so much. And then as a form of constructive program, Gandhian constructive program, by simply creating the spaces that are nourishing for us, because by us, of course, we mean ourselves, but also the whole community, because we're all that, we have that quality of interbeing. We are a communal species. And so by creating spaces that are nourishing and healing for us, those spaces now exist for other people. And then, as I mentioned, as we create those throughways out, we're releasing that pent up energy, we're releasing the more destructive qualities in our world, the old habits that we've had as a people for a long time. Once we let those go, there's something right there for us to replace them with, something better, something more nourishing. And so instantly we find a better way through. Sometimes we just have to turn around to look to see what our neighbors are doing. I think that's really wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an either or equation either. We can be connected to resistance efforts. We can be out there demonstrating. We can be doing economic resistance to mega corporations. Um, all of these things and more. And it goes together with some of these constructive actions. You mentioned Gandhian constructive program. And, from Gandhi's perspective, the idea that you would spin your own cloth to support Indian fabric and spinning as a symbol of national identity and independence from Britain was inseparable from the civil resistance or civil disobedience to the laws of the British Empire in pursuit of becoming no longer the subjects of the British Empire, but rather an independent nation.
Mm-hmm.
So we too can do these things we've been talking about in this kind of spirit and intentionality, that to know that right now there are I think it's like 200 million Amazon Prime accounts
Wow.
in the United States alone. Right, so there's like every adult in the United States has an Amazon Prime account and is paying $14 a month to Amazon and Jeff Bezos and the billionaire class, right? And we justify this in many ways. Oh, we can only get that thing online, or oh, we need the free shipping. But at the end of the day, we need to really ask ourselves, what else could I be supporting for $14 a month that might be even more valuable to me, not just in terms of dollars and cents, but in terms of the world that we want to live in, the worldview that we want to support and popularize, the experience of the workers or the communities that are making those goods or delivering those goods or shipping those goods, the type of values and ethics we want to see in the world. So when we make a shift like that and say, oh, I'm going to cancel my Amazon Prime and instead I'm going to dedicate this $14.99 a month to something else, there's a lot that we can choose to do. Now, that's an individual action. What separates that from movement building or social change and transformation is when we just think of that as a consumer action. Oh, me, I'm just going to cancel my Amazon Prime and do something else. If we want to take this to the next level, we talk with our friends about doing the same. We form a little support group for that transition with one another. We talk about it with our family members, whether they agree with us politically or not. We actively encourage other people to do the same.
Yes.
This is what makes a constructive program have that energy, that revolutionary potential. Is that we don't just think of it as an individual consumeristic action.
Yeah, and that gives us a broader perspective on our capacity to relate to the rest of the world, because our actions are constantly relating to the rest of the world, but especially when we join hands and work together. And I love that image of, I have this $14 a month. Do I really want to give it to this billionaire class that's doing these terrible things? Or do I want to reach out and donate it to a local activist organization, people who are doing work that I care about, or to a CSA and supporting a local farmer and getting some delicious veggies, or your local monk. I've been living for 20 years just on donation, and just being supported by people who probably took that $5, that $14, and said, I'm going to support something different. And it affects me specifically, it affects the farmer, it affects that activist organization. But then as part of these larger movements, there are change makers in the world that we can reach out to and seek guidance from, like yourself, and to move forward towards something much better from our small spaces to the large. And I find that really inspiring. And it makes me feel less alone and less small in a world where there are giant forces and trillionaires wandering around making changes. But together, we're bigger than all of that.
Yeah, and I think, sometimes we get defeatist in terms of purism, right? If we can't stop shopping all together at Amazon, we might as well just not even make the effort, right? I mean, I'm not saying this is a problem out there for other people. I've definitely seen this in myself.
Mm,
Um, the thing is that even incremental changes can make a huge difference when multiplied across many people. So, for example, if you still have to buy that one thing on Amazon that you really can't have to have and you can't get anywhere else, okay, do that.
mm,
Let's just take the judgment out of it. Um, but if you can take back $1 a month, $5 a month from that system and put it somewhere else, that is impactful. If
mm.
everybody who had an Amazon Prime account was doing just $1 a month, that's $200 million that we're putting back into a local economy
Wow.
or some other option every single month, right? And I think we forget that this power exists, and that it doesn't take a whole lot of new customers for, say, one local food item to really help the flourishing of this ecosystem. So if you have 10 friends in your book club and you all decide that, you can't buy everything organic. Gosh, I know what the grocery store prices are like these days, but you're looking at the price of eggs on the shelf and you're like, well, the neighbor's kid who basically grows organic eggs down the block, down the street, his eggs are not that much more expensive, and you decide you're going to go buy those. That's going to make a huge difference to that kid's life,
Yes.
to that family's life. So thinking not just what can I and my family do, but how can me and my friend network make an intentional choice together, and then really notice the impacts of that choice over time.
Mm,
And to think, maybe you're still saving a few dollars on other items at the grocery store because you need to, but you're going to have that one item that you're being intentional about to support.
mm,
Right.
mm.
That's what I mean by kicking out purism and getting really pragmatic and doing what you can, even with one item on your list.
Mm, mm. Mm. And that sense of mm, the expansive versus the small, those the Michael would call them the three harmonies of our impact, the spaces where we focus and where we cultivate these changes in our lives. Sometimes we talk about the very small things, my neighbor with the eggs and my $14 or $1 that I'm able to work with, because sometimes that's all we have to work with. And I recognize that for many people who have these impulses to do good, everybody has that feeling. They're wanting to make the world a better place. And it's amazing how quickly that ambition to make the world a better place can become exhausting, especially if we feel overwhelmed, we feel worn down. And I've heard from lots of different activists, especially this last year, diving into the activist community more, that in the clinic, I get to see people who are just tapped out. They've used everything that they have emotionally, physically, and they feel as though they're not making changes in their lives. And so having some capacity to pay attention to their own self-care and to notice how their own capacity for wellness and their own wellspring of energy is an essential part of the movement. So even if they're only caring about whatever movement or whatever change and transformation in the world they're hoping for, that's the most important thing in their life. Even for those people, regulating their energy levels and making sure that they stay healthy and balanced and mentally and emotionally stable is just as important to the movement as the larger context. And in one of your newsletters recently, you talked about how you've been spending more time taking care of yourself and your family this year. Is that something you mind talking about?
No, not at all. I think to back up a step from my personal experience
Please.
and then get into it from another angle, we are a culture here in the United States in um, in continuous connection to systems of exploitation, expectations of exploitation and oppression and overwork. Whether that's the Puritan work ethic, whether that's coming out of indentured servitude in the 1500s, the enslavement of African Americans for centuries, the exploitation of the Industrial Revolution, where work days were 16, 20 hours long and 7 days a week. Child labor was completely normalized. We had to have social movements to push back on all of this, to win the 8-hour workday, to end and abolish chattel slavery, to reclaim women's right to autonomy and to self-determination from being simply the economic engine of a household's labor. And we are not out of this woods yet, because as we see in our economy, it's the expectation of 2 full-time working adults barely being able to survive on sub-minimum wages, which is pretty much the standard for, at least 40 to 50% of this country. And now we have grind culture, as they call it. We also have automation that we're trying to keep up with. We have things like the Amazon warehouse and delivery workers crisis, where every motion they do is being tracked by AI and optimized for efficiency to the point of like they're being forced to be robots instead of humans. And they're in an ever quickening cycle, which is leading to accidents and injuries and is exploitative in nature. So I mention all of this just to say it's not a neutral landscape. We are steeped in expectations of exploitation, and our movements replicate that, usually inadvertently and unintentionally, and often from a sense of responding to crisis and a lack of necessary labor in the system. There's always more work to be done with great urgency and with great consequences than it appears that we have people to do it. And then we feel guilty for taking time off for self-care. But what we know from longtime activists, Black, Brown, Indigenous, women, queer, and trans, all of the social movements say the same thing. If you want to be in this for the long haul, you have to do self-care. It is not optional. You will burn out and you will drop out of the movement. And we certainly see this in terms of the last year and a half, where since January 2025, we have been slammed with one unrelenting crisis moment after another. And people are responding to crisis, and we're very heartened to see them. But if this is the reality that we're going to be resisting authoritarianism under, we have to be disciplined about how we sustain ourselves for this. And this means that we can't measure our success against authoritarianism as we have stopped everything they're trying to do all the time, every single thing. That's unrealistic. We're not going to do that. My friend Daniel Hunter at Choose Democracy has written very eloquently about this and how we have to measure our success of, is our movement growing? Is it strengthening? Is it creating more sustaining endurance? Is it weakening our opposition? Is it bettering the conditions that we stand for succeeding in the long run. These are the measurements we need to watch. And in those measurements, self-care is a vital part of what helps us do every single one. So self-care is part of resistance, right? We need to really wrap our minds around it. It's part of current resistance movements. It's also part of historic, ongoing resistance to the culture of exploitation that we ourselves can have internalized oppression around and keep replicating. So there is also a difference between self-care and just tuning out, right? Sometimes they can look exactly the same. Sometimes it looks like a tub of ice cream and some Netflix, right? But what makes that different for two different scenarios is, do you come out of your Netflix and ice cream moment more ready to wage struggle or less ready to wage struggle, right? Are you drained and depleted after that experience? Or has it allowed you to take a breath and return on a better sense of grounding and footing? Self-care is going to look really different for each person, but I think being aware for yourself about what's tuning out and what is actually nurturing and nourishing is a pretty good rule of thumb for self-reflection.
Within the Taoist Chinese medicine context, the way that we refer to that difference is appetite versus addiction. Appetite is something that you feed and you're nourished by, and you're better afterward. I eat and I've been nourished, and now I can stop eating and I feel better. I sleep and I'm done sleeping. I sleep enough and now I feel nourished. I don't have to sleep anymore. That's appetite. And addiction is something that you take it and it leaves you a little bit depleted, so you do it again. And every time you do it, you need to do it again. And that cycle is always self-destructive. And very often our culture of our wellness culture, the wellness marketplace, is sold with that kind of this heroin wellness quality, something that you take and I feel a little bit better. That may be something like caffeine for a lot of people. They are exhausted, so they drink a stimulant, they drink some sort of energy drink or something, and now their waste can is filled with these empty cans of energy drinks, but their energy levels are depleted more than ever because rest was what they needed, but instead they stimulated themselves so they felt better. But that cycle always increases in speed. It's a positive feedback loop in the sense that it always picks up speed and uses up more and more fuel and never gives a return for what you are looking for. And so wellness methods that we always want to look for are those that feed the appetite, that actually heal the system and leave you better off, and then you're finished with that. You don't need to rest anymore. You don't need to eat anymore because you nourished yourself well. And that differentiation can be really hard to feel when you're in the middle of it and you're just trying to take care of things. Because like you said, we have problems. Something has to happen. But in order to actually last long enough for that solution to find its way through, then we need to have activists that are being nourished rather than depleted.
Yeah, I think there's a couple other things that connect very deeply to this distinction between self-care and just tuning out. One is, are you coming out of this activity with stronger capacity for paying attention with compassion to the state of the world? Or are you like self-protecting like a hothouse flower to the point where you have no resilience, no ability to pay attention, no ability to show up? Did you stick your toe in the water of activism, get scalded and jump back and never try it again, right? The reality is that we are all living through a time of great change. It is a necessity of being alive to be part of this process of change. We can't step back. We can't tune out entirely. There is no safe resting place to retreat to. And I think the more we build our ability to have good inner and outer skills for showing up and paying attention, the stronger we'll be, and the more equipped we will be for the times that we have been given. And then, the other thing is, for a lot of activists who jump into frontline struggles, there is pain that we experience. It could be physical, it could be emotional, it could be psychological. And so self-care in response to that looks like engaging in trauma healing work, acknowledging when you have experienced trauma and been traumatized. If you have ever been pepper sprayed in the face, if you ever been shot with a rubber bullet, it is a traumatizing event. People have PTSD from this. People have long-term emotional repercussions from being so intensely aware of the suffering that is being caused by the injustice. And self-care techniques help us address this, take a beat to address this, because just like veterans, let's say veterans who are still carrying PTSD can continue to cause great harm in their community if it's left unaddressed. Or we have seen this with cops as well. Many of our police brutality incidents have also involved PTSD within the cop who perpetrated the violence. So we don't want to replicate those cycles, but the reality is that if we do not deal with the PTSD and the trauma we may be carrying from what we've experienced, when we show up again, especially in a frontline activist, say a protest situation, the likelihood that we will not respond to a tense situation in a way that we think is strategic or beneficial increases. So we do this work because we know that when we get back in the hot seat, when we get back into the middle of it, we're going to need to have healed some of the things that we have experienced in our last go around. And that this work benefits everyone. It's not just in those like protest moments when you're facing down a cop. It is also in that really tedious, long organizer meeting where you are arguing about strategy for 8 hours. Right? Whether you get through that and come to a good strategy together with good relationships, or you blow up your relationships and the ability of your network to actually come up with a plan, often comes down to what self-care have you done prior to that meeting?
Yeah, and anybody who's ever had to be part of a community where they're sitting in a circle waiting for consensus for something that requires a lot of healing work beforehand, so you're not bringing into it your own aggressions and your own frustrations, or you can process them as they arise so you don't take them out on your community. Or even as a doctor, if you've ever had to work in an infectious situation, you go into the space that's dangerous, there's communicable problems here, and so you take extra care. And not only do you make sure that you are safe during the process, but you wash yourself afterward. You go through a cleansing process to make sure that you're not carrying these possible infectious elements with you. And violence is like that. Violence leaves damage, it leaves scars, it has a kind of infectious quality to it. And so we have to make sure that we have the capacity to let all of that go when we step away from that before we go back home and into the circles that we care about, so we don't take those inadvertent injurious qualities with us. But it's a skill to be developed for sure.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things to remember about self-care is that it doesn't mean that you go on a 10-month retreat to Bali, right? That is out of reach for most of us. It can be something where you step back and take a break from your movement work, your daily job, whatever it is, for a weekend, a week, I don't know. That is an option, but a lot of self-care techniques are things that we integrate into our day, our moment, even while we keep going with the struggle, right? That we don't always come to a burnout and breakdown point. And that's maybe ideal. So things like you have 5 minutes before your next Zoom call. Do you scroll through your text notifications, or do you sit there and breathe quietly for 5 minutes? Right? We have these little moments where we make choices about whether we go scan the headlines again and thus put ourselves in a state of stress and panic over all the crises that have just tripped all our trigger wires. Or we, do 5 minutes of stretching for our body. All of us know the struggle with food choices, and I don't need to belabor this, but this is a very real thing that I think many of us know about when we get stressed, we often reach for those things that are not necessarily going to make us feel less stressed. Have we drunk enough water today? Right? Do we take that moment to drink a nice glass of water? Or do we reach for that 17th cup of coffee, which is really not going to help us sustain for the long term for sure. Um, but other kinds of self-care are things like you need to hang out with a friend to decompress.
Mm.
You are going to do this for 30 minutes or an hour. Do you spend 50 of those minutes rehashing the political headlines? Or do you spend 50 of those minutes anchoring in the things that bring you joy because you know this is a necessary ingredient for sustaining the struggle, right? It's nothing to feel guilty about. It is something that gives us strength, gives us that remembering of what we're in this for. So yeah, that's something I like to bring up, is to just really think through what self-care means and looks like for you, because each human being is a little different. Some people love punk music. It doesn't do anything for me, honestly. I love to garden, and some people, that is their idea of a fresh hell. So find what works for you, and find the ways that work for you to do it, and don't discount the small moments where you know you're doing something kind and gentle and restorative for your being.
I love that. Yeah, some of the intersectional bubbles that I overlap, I'm part of the autistic spectrum, and coming to terms with not just the way that I think and process, but also some of they're called stims, the stimulation methods, the toys, the styles of movement, the sounds that people will make, something that helps you regulate your nervous system. Because of the culture that I was raised in, expressing those kinds of things was not okay. But they can look like whatever they look like. And it's okay for people to go for a walk and to garden, to spin, to listen to their music. Another intersectional bubble that I'm part of is that the male culture in the United States, and as I was taught, and a lot of us were taught, that it's not okay to have feelings, and that your way of preparing yourself for the next hard thing is to become even harder and more cold inside and more squeezing tighter, which never ends in a good place. And coming to terms with that bit of patriarchal damage that we have, and reaching out and finding community, and allowing yourself the opportunity to grieve or to feel or to process. These can be hard things because the communities that we're in may not be accepting of that stim. Maybe you flap your arms or you spin or something, whatever it is, you make sounds, you reach out to a friend, you call your mom, something that you find nourishing and balancing before you do the next hard thing. Or maybe you just go outside and stand in the sun. But accepting that that's what you require to be healthy and nourished, I feel like is such a huge step for some people, because they have so much internal judgment.
Yeah, and I do want to give a good hat tip and nod to the disabilities rights community in inclusion, because they have really informed this conversation around self-care and what that looks like. And not just self-care, but there's a companion concept that goes hand in hand with it called community care. And this is the idea that this is not an individual pursuit. As much as it's unique to each one of us what kinds of self-care we need, our capacity to create spaces and conditions where self-care is possible for more people in our communities is very high. So, for example, one of the activism things that you do may be offering to a lead organizer to go grocery shopping for them that week. Or if you're very good friends with them, to watch their children so that they can have an hour in the tub soaking or whatever it is. To be the host for the walking therapy group, right, of your activist friends, and to set that container in space. Say, you know what, for this walk down through the park, we are not going to talk about our current president. We're just gonna, it's not what we're here for today. We will talk about this later. So being a convener or a host of a space where self-care is possible. If you are hosting an organizing meeting, giving people time to sit and breathe, maybe at the beginning, maybe midway through when things get really tense and heated, and maybe at the end. So community care is the actions that we take that makes it possible for more and more of our community to have opportunities for self-care. Recognizing that because of the ways that power and privilege work in our society, some people have more ease in accessing self-care and time to do it than other people.
Yeah.
So we can leverage some of our capacities together to equalize that playing field.
And you mentioned that, for instance, within community care, there's you take into account the tensions that build, and maybe you take breaks at strategic times in order to allow for that decompression, so it doesn't come into the conversations. And so as somebody who runs trainings more or less constantly and is constantly working with large groups of people that intersect in various ways, have you found some useful rules of thumb that you can share for the people who are reaching out, that we can say, how do I maintain the wellness within this pop-up community for the next 2 hours so that they're not running into each other in uncomfortable ways?
Yeah, that's a great question. At Pache Penny, we've been doing trainings for 37 years. And we have a style in which we train, which involves, first of all, centering right at the beginning, reading a short quote, doing a short breathing meditation, something that brings us here and now and present. That is often an opportunity for a little moment of self-care for people. We also know that in order to be good listeners, we need to feel heard. So making sure people have breakout rooms to talk with one another and compelling questions with which to explore, and then explicitly inviting them and reminding them of their skills to hold space to listen to others and to self-regulate how much they're talking, how long they're talking, to return a sense of agency to them in that rather than unconscious habits. We also find that thinking about how everybody learns differently, everybody absorbs information differently. Some people really love verbal exercises, some people really love writing exercises, some people need visual images, some people do really great with a musical moment, and trying to balance the ways that we're doing that together is really, we find it to be really healthy in our spaces. And as facilitators, to be open-minded and to always be learning. We're always experimenting. So we don't claim to have the end-all be-all formula here, but rather to be in the process of always trying to recognize the full humanity of the human beings that we're working with and train in such a way that our full humanity is welcome to engage with the material.
The studies that some of which I've actually learned from you about, when we have students of differing backgrounds or people coming together who have very different opinions about things, they were doing various kinds of experiments to see what brought people together the best. And often it was that shared project that allowed people to collaborate, and then their differences seemed to fall away. And even at the monastery, we have some neighbors who have some very different ideas about what's okay and what's not okay. And of course, in a debate room or something, if we ever did that, they would be a very acrimonious, unharmonious experience to debate those ideas together. But one of our neighbors is an expert in tractor repair, and he comes by and helps us work for the tractor to help work on the land in the monastery. And when we're all working together on these projects, it is wonderfully friendly and kind. And it's amazing the kinds of subjects that can come up without any hint of aggression or discomfort, because we're busy doing something together. And I feel like that skill of creating a project where different sides can come together to work on something is particularly tricky. And I'm wondering if there's something that you can share about that, if you have any experience with trying to organize those kinds of gatherings.
Well, in a time of really intense political polarization like the one that we're living through, there is value to creating efforts, endeavors, and situations in which people across divides can come together and can restore an understanding of common ground that may be shared between the participants. Because this is the foundational social connection that is going to be very useful when we want to sort through the conflict points, right? That we aren't thinking about this conflict in terms of the two demons on the two sides, the ones that think of it this way and the ones that think of it that way, and we should just fight it out until one subdues the other. Literally, that is the mentality that we are approaching a lot of our conflicts in. But rather to have the living reminders of we are all human beings with moments of triumph, moments of failure, with heartbreak, with loss, with love, with things we care deeply about. These are the things that remind us why it's worth it to work through our conflict points and why it's worth it to do it non-violently. With Pace Bene, all of our work revolves around building a culture of active nonviolence. And nonviolence doesn't mean that we don't have conflicts. It just means we have better skills than violence and domination with which to navigate these conflicts together. And it doesn't mean it's not bumpy, contentious, tension-filled. It means that at the end of the day, we're all going to go home. We're all going to have a chance to return to this conversation the next day if we didn't resolve it today. And I do think that the nonviolent toolbox is quite broad. There's a lot of skills, there's a lot of practices, there's a lot of approaches to conflict that live within it that actually makes us more versatile and more likely to successfully negotiate and resolve a conflict that's coming up, whether that's something in your neighborhood or a massive political conflict like many of the ones we are concerned about today. So creating those moments of encounter whereby our common humanity is seen rebuilds the social infrastructure, ties, or cohesion, I think is the word I'm looking for, that helps us weather the framings that each side of this is ingesting from mass media, from their politicians, and helps move us out of the realm where we decide to fight a civil war over these issues, and more into the realm where we wage civil resistance on these issues, where we have maybe very heated arguments about this, or maybe even more ideally, we actually have a democratic process wherein we discourse and debate about the issues. And one of the things this is making me think of that I really believe as a democracy practice is also very connected to nonviolence. That when I encounter someone, let's say at the post office, who is on the opposite side of the political aisle, doesn't agree with me on the issue that we're talking about, to embody nonviolence in that I don't want to engage in violence with this person. I don't want to dominate them. I don't want to subdue them. I don't need to outshout their opinion. Their having their opinion does not invalidate the morality, the science, the logic, the whatever of my own position. On the other hand, I don't want to be passive. I don't want to give up. I don't want to eschew my democratic right to have discourse and debate on the issues that affect our lives. So on the one hand, I'm not going to be passive. I'm not going to be violent. What am I going to be? I'm going to be nonviolent, and I'm going to engage in this conversation. I'm going to very genuinely listen to that other person's opinion, whether I don't have to agree with it. And I'm going to find my moment to speak my truth too, right? I'm not going to just passively take their opinion. And I'm going to do this in the spirit that that moment, that interaction, whether it's short or long, is part of doing democracy. It is part of what we are actively campaigning to preserve, to protect, to expand in our society right now today. It is a nonviolent action against authoritarianism and a whole long list of other phrases like oligarchy, corporatocracy, and billionaire power, and a lot more that I could mention.
Well, I love this this sense that this idea that rest, for instance, rest is revolutionary because it helps to move directly against this culture of exploitation that you're talking about. And so many of these skills, whether at the level of the policy or communal interactions, the same skills that you develop at those stages are the same skills that we use to heal ourselves, which is how you know that they're the right toolbox to be developing, because the tools of compassion, the tools of the capacity to listen, the ability to question ourselves and to pause, to become still, to hear a voice, a conditioning voice, because we're just creatures of conditioning in a way, to hear that voice that's been conditioned to feel guilty about taking a rest, or to treat somebody else who doesn't seem the same as us as the other. We can hear those voices and we can feel those feelings, and we allow them to be there, and we learn to work with them in a way that's kind and compassionate, because that's the skill we want to develop in the larger community. But first we cultivate it in ourselves using these various methods of personal cultivation. And I'm wondering, in your own life, if you don't mind sharing, what are some of the skills that you've been working on that you've found that as you cultivate them in yourself, they transfer into your larger practice as a change maker and author and trainer?
Yeah. Well, I just mentioned that idea of courageously speaking your truth and not being afraid of a little social tension. My subculture in the US was fairly leery of rocking the boat, especially, don't talk politics at the dinner table kind of a thing, which is a very anti-democratic attitude. So challenging that, and that's in the nonviolence field, we say that's stepping out of passivity, right? Passivity is also very complicit in violence. We have not, if we are passive, if we are silent, we are not neutral in this equation. We are wrapped up and embroiled in the side of injustice, the dominant class, the dominant paradigm, the status quo, and all its violence. So doing the self-reflection and inner preparation with which to be able to speak your truth, to be able to challenge injustice when it comes up in front of you, to be willing to get out there on the sidewalk and hold your sign, or to put out your yard sign. These are very small things compared to what we can be doing, but many people, these are stumbling blocks for them. This is how we like weightlift for doing the other things that also need to be done, the things like economic resistance, like ice watch, and standing up for the right of our neighbors to be our neighbors. So that's one thing that I think about. The other thing that's pertinent to this conversation is self-care is a living practice. I grew up working on a farm. I grew up working very hard as a young person. I came up in a lower class family, working class, hovering on the poverty line. And so I learned that, the constant scramble is the only way you survive. It's not even about getting out of this, it's about survival. And so I still have many of those patterns that often reapply in ways that they don't need to at this stage of my life. So challenging the patterns of overwork in myself has been very important. And I'm a cancer survivor. I worked myself right to the point of, needing emergency surgery and chemo after that. And I don't ever want to do that again if I can help it. And I think about Dr. King, who was hospitalized, I don't know, 5 or 6 times for exhaustion. And when he died, the autopsy showed that his heart was like the condition of a 61-year-old, although he's not even 40, I don't think, but just barely 40. So, the movements are the greatest cause on earth. They have the most compelling argument for us to give every minute of our time to them. And yet we are just burning the candle at the other end. We are stealing a long lifetime of movement work from the movement by exhausting ourselves now. And I think we need to think about that trade-off. and think about whether it's worth it. And think about why we're not doing more recruitment work for more people to be in the movement, right? So I could work from dawn until 2 a.m. every single day, and do all sorts of things for the movement. But what would happen if I took one of those hours, or even 20 minutes of those hours a day, recruiting other people to do half of some of this work, like even one task? So thinking about where we're spending our time and why it might be a benefit to do a little bit of outreach for our movements instead of doing everything for our movements, I think is a practice that I'm reflecting a lot on right now.
Thank you so much. And again, for those people who are watching, maybe for some crazy reason they haven't heard from you or heard of you, all of the links that you can find down below will guide you in an adventure, a Rivera Sun adventure. And I highly recommend, if you're looking for inspiration at any age, for people in your community who are younger or for yourself in the future, the body of work that is available that Rivera has been doing by working from dawn until 2 in the morning is extensive and inspirational and breathtaking. And I am genuinely grateful for this library that you've left for us to explore. And I highly recommend that everybody go out and pick up whichever one shows up first. And please do go on to the links that I give down below. Don't buy them from Amazon if you can help it, because there are better places to reach out and better ways to build the community with your $14 a month. Rivera, thank you so much for everything that you share with us.
Thank you, John, and thank you for the work that you are doing.
Thank you, Rivera, for sharing your wisdom and experience with us today. Step by step and heart to heart, we can learn another way. Peace begins in simple moments, lived a little every day. Till we meet again, dear friends, keep compassion as your guide. Peaceful voices, gentle courage, walking always side by side.